Hey, what's up, everyone? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Balance. I appreciate you listening week after week, and I just ask that you just help me spread the word and get the show out to more people. Tell your friends to subscribe, to listen, all of that. Help me by retweeting my posts or anything like that. I really appreciate it because, again, this is my dream. This is a passion. It's not just something I do on the weekends or a hobby. Like, this is life. Like, ball is life. This is life. So, we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started this week. So, we're going to jump in with Black Excellence, and that goes to Marsai Martin. She plays Diane on Blackish, and the trailer for her movie Little just released, and it also stars Regina Hall and Issa Rae, and it looks fabulous. Like, I'm excited to go see it. And so this actually was Marsai's brainchild. She came up with the concept of the movie, and she even fired her agent who told her to just sit back, relax, and chill and just stop doing so much. So she is Black Excellence. She is a boss, and I'm so proud of her. She's executive producing the movie at 14 years old, which I think makes her the youngest to ever do it. So definitely Black Excellence. Also this week, a lot of stuff's been going on. Centonia Brown, she was finally released. Well, she's not released. She's granted clemency, but she will be released in August. So that is very exciting news. She spent most of her life in prison, and she is a sex trafficking victim. So I'm glad to see that she can hopefully get a fresh start at her life. Now, of course, everybody watched R. Kelly's documentary, Surviving R. Kelly, that aired on Lifetime. And I don't want to go too much into it because I don't want to trigger anyone, but there were just so many different things that, just really were remarkable to me. And one of those is the fact that he was performing at the Winter Olympics at the time of the charges and all of that going on. And it was just mind-boggling to me. But it shows how much, or rather how little, they care about women and victims of sexual abuse and assault, and especially Black women. I think that if he was accused of, assaulting young white female teenagers, that it would have been a different story. He would not have been performing at the Winter Olympics and everything like that. So that was very shocking. Also, I was young at the time, so I didn't really get it, but there's been kind of dialogue and discussion about it on Twitter, and it makes sense. Like, why do people call it a sex tape? It was a rape tape. The victim, she was way too young. She cannot fully consent to sex with such an older man. And so that was not a sex tape. It was a rape tape. And you have to watch your language, because language, in fact, does matter. And people think, oh, it's just semantics. Oh, you're just being so picky. But no, it really matters because it helps change the narrative. So anyway, another thing that stood out to me was Aaliyah's parents saying that, before the documentary was released and when it was airing, that they were there the whole time and all these things about Aaliyah are lies. People saw it. And at the end of the day, like, you were there when they got married. That's legal documentation, sis. Y'all were not there every step of the way unless you were there co-signing the wedding between your 15-year-old daughter and this really older man. So again, it's like, I understand that you don't want to admit to the fact that you let your daughter fall prey to such a thing, but it is what it is, and you can honor her legacy by helping fellow victims and helping, get the word out about what he's done. Like, the pride is a dangerous thing. It could be the downfall of many, and that's all it comes down to, is that Leah's parents, they're trying to hold on to their pride and their dignity, and they don't want to face what they've done. And a lot of people don't want to face the bad things they've done or how they haven't done right by their loved ones. Another thing that stood out to me was Sparkle. Like, there was sketch behavior in the fact that he wouldn't let people in his camp talk to Sparkle. And then she talks about how she went out of her way to be so defiant and go and boldly talk to those people. That was sketch behavior right there that should have told you something. So I'm not sure what made her follow up and introduce her 12-year-old cousin to him. Like, I don't get it. And so while I sympathize with Sparkle and everything like that, it's not adding up to me. Why would, again, you're just ignoring things. And she said it couldn't be me. And so I think that mentality is why she introduced, oh, it's not going to happen to me. Like, it's not that type. It's not going to happen to my family. Like, that, again, and it'll be discussed later when I have an interview with a doctor who's going to speak on a clinical perspective of this documentary. Again, that's such a dangerous thing. You don't know what can happen until you're in that situation. And it's just you need to take all things at face value. Also, there is the idea, which was shocking to me. I didn't know that R. Kelly couldn't read or write, but there's that. And so his ex-wife, Andrea, was saying there's who's helping him book these flights? So there's that level of complicity. Like all these people speaking in the documentary, y'all knew the bedroom and the main studio room and off in these little areas. Y'all saw the girls. Like y'all helped do these things. Y'all helped usher these girls in. So again, it just speaks to how we do not take black women's lives and our value and worth and our safety seriously. Like all these people were helping facilitate that, and they too are just as guilty as R. Kelly, because R. Kelly couldn't get where he's at and done what he's done without others. And so that to me was just so shocking. And watching these people just openly talk about these things, I'm like, yo, like you just let that go on. Like, why? Like, where are your morals? Is money that important? I get people they need to make the bread, they need to feed their families and all these different things. But again, you need to have that basic moral and principle and sensibility. And it's mind boggling to me. And then, of course, all the different things like how people couldn't leave to get their hair done, and their hairdresser had to come to them, or they would be starved for 3 days if they disobeyed the rules, or how they couldn't look at other men, or they get slapped, they had to ask to brush their teeth and use the bathroom, all these different things. It was just mind boggling to me, and it's crazy. And also that he tried to pin it on his brother and say, well, maybe he's the one, it's not me in the tape, that's my brother. Like, that's just wild, and shows how low of a person, how low that he was stooped to try to blame his own brother for his own actions. And another thing that's mind-boggling to me is that Marvin Sapp recently collaborated with R. Kelly on a song, and it's still getting airplay. It's still getting radio play, even after the documentary. And, sexual abuse is so prominent, and, black families, they typically ignore it, and we'll get into that later. And then even just in general, like religion, they kind of put that down. Like, they just ignore it. Like, all these Catholic cases of the priests abusing the kids, like this stuff is all ingrained. And it's just amazing, and it's just mind-boggling to me once again. But something that I really wanted to hit on, well, the Pied Piper thing, crazy. I didn't realize it till now. Other people have hit on that. But what I really want to talk about is this manipulation thing, how the girls were like, oh, like he's shown me this side of him, and you guys don't know this side of him. Y'all don't know him like that. And I think it was just so important to hit on that manipulation tactic, how they have a moment of vulnerability to you. They open up to you about something personal, and it does. It scoops you in. It pulls you in. And that's just aside from sexual assault victims. That happens with all, or sexual abuse victims. That happens with all, like, abuse, whether it's emotional and verbal and physical, all these different things. Like, I thought like I was building a real connection with this guy, and I was trying to go against what someone who was his best friend was telling me, just because I'm like, well, oh, you don't know about these moments we share. You don't know about these things that he told me. But in the end, what was real, and he wasn't a good person. And I wish I would have listened beforehand, but but I just really wanted to point that out because it was just such an important thing to discuss. And one more thing I want to do is shout out to Dominique's mom, Michelle Kramer. I'm so proud of her for fighting for her baby girl and fighting so hard. She's a real parent. She is a real mother. And I'm just so happy that Dominique's back home safe. I can't express how good it was to see that. That episode 5, it got me. I was crying. But yeah. And again, like I said, when we come back from this break, we're going to speak with a doctor, and she's going to, Dr. Hooper actually, and she's going to speak clinically on this documentary and mental health and young adolescent sexual abuse survivors. So yeah, I think it'll be a great episode. All right, we'll take a break and we'll be right back. Hey everyone, we are back and joined by Dr. Janielle Hooper, who, as mentioned earlier, will be speaking about the documentary from a clinical perspective. Hi Janielle, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you?
I am doing pretty good, Saturday, that's always awesome. So yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and jump in. And so could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. So I am a pediatric nurse practitioner, and I specialize in mental health. And I see children and adolescents for mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, bipolar, and PTSD. And I opened my practice here in Marietta, Georgia, the end of 2017. Mm-hmm. And I've just made it my mission to get the word out there to the community about mental health, mm-hmm. and just help improve these numbers and give these kids a place to come for treatment.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And on my podcast, a lot I speak about mental health. I don't know if you've had a chance to like check out past episodes, but that's definitely something that I heavily advocate for adults and children. Like just taking your mental health seriously, because some people don't view it, as seriously as like physical illnesses and things like that. So
absolutely, they have been always essentially two different components, and it's just as important to address the mental health as the physical health, and including the emotional and spiritual health as well too. So all of those components are essential in order to move forward and get these patients the right treatment they need.
absolutely. And so before I begin with the next question, I want to use the term allegedly for legal purposes only. It's not truly reflective of my beliefs. So moving forward, a lot of R. Kelly's alleged victims were between the ages of 12 and 17. Could you describe aspects of the adolescent mind frame that will allow for them to fall victim to a predator? Like, what are some risk factors?
Absolutely. So, we all know that the 12 to 17-year-old, their mind is underdeveloped, and they are very easy to entice at that age.
Mm-hmm.
You can bribe children with food and toys and gifts, and you can even bribe adolescents with perks and things that their family is not able to provide for them. So they are very, very vulnerable at that age,
Mm-hmm.
and the mind and brain are underdeveloped, and the predators prey on this particular group of people because they learn them,
Mm-hmm.
and they study them, and they identify the children who are vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
who are easy to control. And the biggest thing I think predators like in this age range is they find the ones who are easily accessible,
Mm-hmm.
and also they find the ones who parents aren't, heavily involved, and there's very little parental engagement. So these are the ones who get dropped off at the neighbor's house or get dropped off at the friend's house frequently, and those are the prime ones who get set up for all types of abuse.
Mm-hmm. And so, just kind of thinking of the documentary, there were so many victims in the documentary, but is there one that you can point to in particular that was described that kind of speaks to that adolescent mind frame? And
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, and it's unfortunate because, most of them were right around the age of 16, 17, and 18. And again, you have those, first of all, with R. Kelly, you have the aspect of he's famous,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the celebrity, and I'm kind of stargaze. So you
Mm-hmm.
have that already as a foundation. And then you further manipulate this child, and, again, with the perks and benefits and the wealth and what I can provide for you, that further lures them in, and it creates the perfect environment for the teenagers to become, essentially the victims locked up in the home. And then this further perpetuates the abuse because now they're mentally controlled, they're physically controlled, they're sexually controlled, they're financially controlled, and this just breeds a ground of self-hate,
Mm-hmm.
self-shaming. Did I put myself in this abuse? They have blame, they have fear, and that keeps them in that environment until, they get to a point where, they said, I'm not taking this anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about Dominique because she's the one that we saw in the documentary get rescued by her mother. And I was thinking about how, R. Kelly broke them down and convinced them that no one else loved them
Yes.
but him. So could you
Yes.
kind of speak to how can they do that? How can they convince you that your parent doesn't love you? Because from the documentary, we saw that Dominique's mother loved her very much. And, she was banned from the hotel, but she decided to go back in because she wanted her daughter. So how can they just convince them of this?
Yeah, and that's very similar to what the Savages, that their daughter is experiencing
Yes.
right now, because she is still with him. And, supposedly that video was released where she's stating, I'm fine, I'm okay, this is where I want to be. But that goes back to show just how far she's been manipulated,
Mm-hmm.
because although she's, released this video, it's her parents, she's been told what to say, exactly what to say, and how to say it. And this is just as similar to people who are kidnapped and held captive. And, you have videos of prisoners from overseas releasing videos stating, I'm okay, I'm still alive. But it's all brainwashed and they're manipulated. And if that's their daily exposure to someone telling them, I love you, they don't love you, this is best for you here, they're hearing this repeatedly, this is what the person starts to believe. And once they believe it, they can be released or leave the home, but feel the need to come back to that space because that is now a learned behavior. Well, this is what he told me. This is what is accurate. This is what is correct. So I need to come home. And that is part of the brainwashing because, again, like the women who are still there, I'm sure some people are saying, why don't they just walk out the door or just get up and leave? They are now in almost a trance over there. And it's going to take something like, police going over there and authorities getting involved, and that person's going to just need years of therapy to kind of undo all the damage that's been done.
Yeah, and it just reminded me, like what you were saying, I was thinking about Dominique, because at the end, it displayed kind of like where everybody's at now from the documentary, and it talked about how Dominique went back about 3 days later, but then she came back home. So yeah, it just kind of speaks to what you were saying with that whole trans, and they're just, so that sort of thing. And so you were talking about how they'll need years of therapy to undo the effects. So I kind of just wanted to ask you, could you speak to the effects that sexual abuse could have on the mental health of adolescents and teenagers?
Absolutely. There are multiple effects of emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, including the obvious, which are depression, anxiety, sleeping problems, agitation, even prostitution. But they all seem to lead to PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder. And with that, you have the isolation, you have the withdrawn person, they have poor self-esteem, they feel embarrassed, ashamed, and some of those lead to kind of like a hypersexualized person, and those are the ones that continue the abuse. And another most common effect of history of sexual abuse is substance abuse. They are trying to numb this feeling. They're trying to make it go away. They're trying to cover it up. And, researchers have already identified that 90% of people who abuse drugs or alcohol have a history of abuse. And so we know the outcome of that, and we know what happens if someone cannot get treatment, and just a lifelong of self-blame and hurt, and it instills the shame in the victim, and just PTSD, alcohol abuse, and just a lifelong sentence of mental health issues.
And then a lot of the people in the documentary, they also expressed that they faced domestic violence at the hands of R. Kelly.
Yes.
And, we were speaking earlier again how it's not easy to leave. And that's the same thing with domestic violence. It's not easy to leave. And I think they were saying it takes at least 7 tries for the victims to leave and things like that, and how dangerous it is to leave because a lot of the times they try to kill them when they do. So could you can you kind of speak to that added component, like how when you already have to deal with the sexual abuse and the domestic violence, could you kind of speak to the effect that both of those at the same time can take on mental health and things like that?
Absolutely. So, part of the way that the control is given to the man is the physical abuse occurs on top of the sexual abuse. So not only is a woman scared to be raped repeatedly by the man, but even down to hit and kicked and slapped, and that is a form of keeping them in the homes. And just out of fear, the abuse repeating or getting worse. If I try to leave and I get caught, I know I'll be beat even more often, or now I'll be tied to the bed, or now I won't be allowed to walk around the room. That fear alone has, again, provided in the thoughts drive your actions. So if they're thinking that, I have this fear, it's going to control their actions, and that keeps them in the home longer. And there's multiple reasons why women stay. It's a fear of being beat more. It's the financial. He controls all the money. I have no place to go. I need to stay because of my children. Not so much for the adolescents, but for the older women. And, this is just part of the lifestyle that they have grown accustomed to, and they don't know any different. And they say, I can't be on my own. He controls everything. He has the money. He has the cars. I have no education. I have no job. I can't work anywhere. And that prolongs the abuse, and the guy knows this. And so he keeps that environment for the woman, so she's not able to leave. And, again, this can go on for years before someone can actually kind of break through and free of that.
And then this is kind of an aside from the general discussion, but just thinking that there's so many people who will say, oh, that wouldn't be me, that couldn't be me. And I just kind of want to get your opinion on it. I feel that you can never say, like, what will be you, what won't be you, until that situation occurs. Yeah, go ahead.
You cannot speak of that until you're in that situation. And also you have to have all those same factors as that same person has as well. Because I know even people, make comments similar to slavery, if I were growing up in that day and age, that wouldn't happen to me, or I wouldn't get this. And you don't know unless you're in that situation. And, again, back to what I originally said, the abusers pick out particular people and particular personalities. So maybe if they saw that this person was one way, maybe they sensed they wouldn't be able to control them. They wouldn't be able to keep that one person in the home. But they see someone else who is more vulnerable, who is younger, who has the younger mind, is easily influenced, and they said, I can get her, though, or I can get him. 3 out of 5 boys are sexually abused, opposed to 5 out of 7 women. So the abuse is on both sides. So that is a component of it. They seek out particular types of people. So that's also something to recognize, because it's a certain type that they focus in on.
Absolutely. And you were just speaking to male victims as well. And it just made me think about, like we were talking about Dominique earlier, and R. Kelly, like he picked up on the tomboy aspect of her personality. He played into that and had her basically transform into a boy. So, it just kind of speaks to so many things you were saying. And it also makes me wonder if there are male victims of R. Kelly out there. Yeah.
Exactly. And since there's still a stigma with that, not just the mental health aspect, but, males aren't easily coming out and stating this information, because there's a lot of questions that go through their mind if they're getting sexually abused, and then they have to question their sexuality. And, sometimes the abusers, it's not painful. It may feel good, and then they feel embarrassed and ashamed. And so who knows if there were males involved?
Absolutely. And then just kind of to wrap it up a little bit, if you could just, aside from a clinical perspective, if you could just give kind of your general opinion of the documentary.
Yeah. So I think the documentary was, we needed that out in order to have these narratives, because this is still going on and it still needs to be addressed. Parents need to know how to talk to their children and teach them about appropriate touching, areas that are off limits, knowledge of their own body, because a lot of times kids don't know what is right from wrong. And I've even had cases go to court that were dismissed because a child didn't know their proper name of their body part. And so they could not even, accuse the molester of any abuse because we're playing around with baby names and nicknames, and they couldn't prove that in court. So it goes down to listening to your kids, never dismiss a child's attempt to tell you some abuse has happened, and just honestly connecting with your children, knowing where they're at, knowing who they're around, knowing their boundaries, and just keeping that communication open. I think that is imperative as a parent. And, I think that documentary was necessary in order to create these types of conversations.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking about a few things that you said. And when you were talking about people don't know like the proper names and stuff, and a lot of that, I would say would have to do a little bit with religion and Christianity. Like there's that shyness. We don't like to speak on sexual natures and things like that. And we feel like kids are too young to know certain things. And that can be damaging, as you were saying, with cases being dismissed.
Absolutely.
And I also, go ahead.
Yeah. And that just, I've seen it firsthand. Firsthand in the witness stand. Again, people call them private parts, even like candy bars, for example. So when you say, he touched my Snickers, you can't validate that in court. You can't send anyone to jail over an accusation of touching Snickers. So when you teach your child from the beginning, this is what this is called, this is yours, these are the boundaries with yours, this is your private area, you already have initiated that conversation, and you're giving your child that solid foundation between what's right and wrong. So anything outside of that, at minimum, we would like to believe they can come and say, Mommy, you told me this, we talked about this, so this is what happened, and that starts that conversation as well.
Absolutely, because I know like in the Black community, like kids are told to say, oh, I'm telling stories. Like you can't say the word lie. And it's just, it's just simple. Like it's just simple things like that can have like effects when it's applied to other areas. And then also in the Black community, which was kind of a dialogue I saw on social media because of the documentary, is that we don't acknowledge the sexual predators within our own families. And and so I think in part that's one of the things I liked about this documentary is that it spurred that conversation, that people are talking about like, hey, it could be your uncle, it can be, and it's time to address that. It's no longer time to sweep it under the rug or just kind of talk about it as one of those things that happen,
Exactly. And that's very classic in the family homes is, they will have knowledge of it, but just choose to avoid it or ignore it, versus getting that family member some help, which only, hurts the victim because you're essentially prolonging this and you're essentially like supporting this. And it hurts the abuser as well because they're not getting treatment or any type of help. So, you'll have a family member, living somewhere and they'll just say, oh, we're not going to go over to his house, or when we go over there, just ignore him. That's not helping the victim or the abuser.
Absolutely. And I would really like to thank you, Dr. Hooper, for appearing on the show today. I feel like we had a very good discussion, very good dialogue, and I hope the listeners feel the same.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed having you. So we'll take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Hey guys, before we jump into the last topic of the episode, I wanted to give you Dr. Hooper's social media handle so you can find her on LinkedIn, and I'll spell out her name. That way it's easier for you to find her. So Dr. and then her first name is spelled G-A-N-I-E-L-L-E. Middle name begins with the E, so Janielle E. Hooper. And so hopefully that'll help you find her on LinkedIn. And I really want to thank her again for appearing on the show. I feel like it was a really good conversation. And I feel like she made me better in my work. And so I also want to give you her Instagram for her practice page. And it's at axis_hope. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump in actually. So what I want to discuss in the end is that we've been seeing all of these people announcing their candidacy for the 2020 elections. And I want to point out two different things that I've been noticing and discussing on Twitter. Yes, you do need to point out the flaws of candidates because especially it's important to vote for someone who will actually do something and make a difference. But do not let just the fact that a candidate is imperfect ban you from voting, or just a few things you do not like ban you from voting, because that's how we got Donald Trump. Voting is very important, and I don't know how to express that more than I can, because for instance, Ruth Bader Ginsburg right now is in and out of the hospital, and she hasn't been at her oral arguments and things like that. Again, whoever is president gets to place Supreme Court justices, lifelong positions that can shape the entire legal body, because a lot of times, like, the law has to defer to what the higher court says. So like it can shape so much for so long, for decades to come. It's already a 5-4 majority for the conservatives. If it's 6-3, it's going to be horrible. So it's important to vote in these primaries. It's important to vote in the actual election. And I just really want to encourage everyone to, yes, read up, be knowledgeable, know what these candidates have done. Pick the best one, and pick someone at the end of the day. Like, you do not want to let Donald Trump get another 4 years. And honestly, it could be a very real possibility. Republicans will stick to him through and through. His core base will stick to him through and through. Like, look at what he's getting away with now. Do you really think they won't let him get voted in again? In Georgia, Brian Kemp was elected governor. He's a direct descendant, basically, of Donald Trump. So I just want you to understand, this wasn't a fluke. This isn't something that could just happen once and never happen again. Russia, yes, played a part in all of that, but there are people out here with these horrible views. There are people out here who are just bigots, and they will go out and vote, and we need to go out and vote. Rain, sleet, sun, snow, shine, all of that. You need to get up and vote. It's important. Absentee ballots if you can, early voting if you can, like all of these different things. Show up at the polls. Again, whether it's an absentee ballot, whether it's early voting, whether you're there in November 2020, you have to vote. It's important for your life. Like, humanity, basic rights, all of that is at stake constantly in this country. And it's sad. And again, no candidate is going to be perfect. They're going to, like, there's things about, I don't know if it's Kamala or Kamala Harris, but I don't know how to pronounce her first name, and I hate if I butchered it. I'm sorry. But there's things I don't like about her. But if push comes to shove, yeah, I will vote for her most definitely. And I think that was the era that people really didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton. There were things I wasn't fond of about her. Super predator. That's a language that's been detrimental to black men and black people in general when it comes to police brutality. But at the end of the day, I voted for her. I was not going to let Trump win. And so, but he did anyway, because so many sat it out, or so many voted for people who, if you dug into it, they weren't that great either, and that third party option just messed things up and split the vote. So again, there is a time where you could be revolutionary, and I am a kind of a progressive person and kind of leftist, but you also have to remember, you do not want Donald Trump or anyone of his like him to get in office. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is really old. Like, again, it's just so important to think of all of the factors. It's beyond you, okay? When you vote, you are voting for you and your humanity, but you're also voting for everybody else. Look at the kids dying in what I'm going to call modern day concentration camps with the immigration stuff. Again, it's more than you. It's bigger than you. So I just challenge you to remember that, and I just challenge you to be focused on who's announcing their run. I encourage you to be involved in the politics as much as is healthy mentally possible. So again, that's just kind of what I want to leave you with for this episode. So thank you for tuning in. Be sure to, again, help me get the word out, and I'll see you next week.